So Be'ezras Hashem, it's a big supposed to be sitting in front of people, anybody who is here. And the title of these shirim are, I believe, walking in the footsteps of the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon Spus Samya Ben Avinu, and an introduction to Pnimiyas HaTorah. So it's certainly a title that was for appearances. Obviously, that's a task that is far beyond what any person is capable of doing, and also what's happening every time a person learns Torah. The yichud of Baal Shem Tov and the Gra, every time a person is in the process of learning or engaged in avoda. So it's something that we all know intuitively, and also, but the premise of revealing, this historic connection between these two apparently oppositional tzaddikim is a task that's gargantuan. But we're blessed to live in a generation where already before us, for a long time now, this was not really an argument. Nobody was under the impression that there was a machlokas between the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, and that in spite of the fact that there was a reality of cherem, there was a reality of the historicity of the events that took place that created the rift between hisnagdus, or the movement of Jewish functionality in Lithuania and the areas surrounding there and its great historic precedents, etc., and the nation Hasidic movement and all of its previous influences that kind of gave birth to what the Baal Shem Tov's Hasidus looks like. But Sof Davar Kol Nishma, the notion that there was a machlokas between the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and the Vilna Gaon, the Heilige Gra. The Heilige Gra is an impossibility to begin with. It's a Klal Gadol, and this is brought down in a sefer called Chayei Nefesh. In the sefer Chayei Nefesh, written by Gedalia Aaron Gedalia Koenig, I'm not sure exactly what the name iteration is, but he was not the previous, but the previous going of the Koenig family. He was a machine, a computer. I mean, he was also Ben Adam with the Lei Passer. He was one of the Gedolei Mashpiyei Breslov. He was also an encyclopedia. He wrote encyclopedic works on the Ramak, collecting and compiling, on the Arizal, on Gilgulim, on Rabbi Nassan, on Rabbi Nachman, Mamish, on Agadatot Hashas. He was very close with the Baal Sulam. He was very close to Chazon Ish, who was a Goyim's Goyim. And he wrote a sefer called Chayei Nefesh, which was written to clarify a particular point that was brought down in the 4th chapter of Nefesh HaChaim from Rav Chaim Volozhiner. And the purpose of this sefer was to clarify the point that Rav Chaim Volozhiner had made, that it's impossible to ever come to identify or orient oneself to the Shechina in a particular way of his kashas to a tzaddik, etc., etc. It was a very particular point of avoda and the idea that I certainly have no grasp of and I don't understand whatsoever. But the ikar tachlis of the sefer was to show how there's really no machlokas. It's not here are all the reasons that you're wrong, but it's to show here's no machlokas here. There's a yichud here at the heart of the Nefesh HaChaim and at the heart of the Torah of Baal Shem Tov. And in the Hakdama there, he says that I heard Kach Kublani me beis aviv hu kibel me aviv she'i efshar she'yeh machlokas b'yesodei hadaf. That it's impossible conceive of the notion that there is an actual machlokas at the heart, at the core, at the foundation of das, of what we orient ourselves towards as the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah in terms of what makes Yahadus in terms of Emunah and belief. That it's impossible that there would be a machlokas. So when a person begins to hear from the moment that they're born or even before that there's this profound machlokas between the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and people walk around with the basic assumption that there's this concept called tzimtzum, that Hashem had to, so to speak, conceal His infinite light in order for the world to be created. And in order to conceal His infinite light, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the secret revelation called tzimtzum, which is the ability to minimize Himself by way of revealing a concealment that is also the presence of Himself. And that we know that Hashem had to do this thing, and there's a machlokas about what it means. The Gra says this, and the Baal Shem Tov says this, and ultimately there are these collisions of worlds and these two separate paths that lead so far away from one another, to the degree that we know that the Baal Panya went to visit the Vilna Gaon to reveal that there was unity, and the Vilna Gaon jumped out the window because he was so afraid, v'chule, v'chule. And we're taught that this path is right or that path is right, and we're taught that really there was this massive machlokas, this split, at the core, at the foundational point of a Yahdus is, to the degree that you can have a machlokas and a cherem involved with the notion of how one grasps HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the simplest of terms. Ever with me? Stay there. Now, the fact that there's no real foundational, fundamental, yesodi machlokas between the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and the Vilna Gaon, and we're going to see that those are names that represent worlds, and each world has cities, and each world has countries, and each country has cities, and each city has streets, and there's infinite iterations of the Talmidei HaGaon and the Totzaos of the Gaon. You have Lumdus, and you have Mechkar, you have so many different iterations, and then in Hasidus you also have the outgrowth of a different way of learning Torah, and then there's a certain point where the two of them meld together and there's an interconnectivity between the two. And so, but writ large, the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon saying that there's no inherent fundamental machlokas at the heart of these two tzaddikim is not to claim that they were saying the same thing. This is a very important point. Well, to clarify, it's that they're saying the same thing, but they are not saying the same thing in the same way, and that when looking at the way that they're saying the same thing, it is completely and entirely reasonable, both textually as well as kind of framework-oriented wise, to conceive of there being a split or a separation between these two paths. First, we have to reveal that there's a unity at the heart of the tzaddikim, and that when there's a machlokas, or a machlokas as massive and foundational as a machlokas, like the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon, what is fundamentally important to maintain in mind is that it's not kipshuto. Just as Simpson is lav kipshuto, so too the machlokas is lav kipshuto. Now, saying that the machlokas is lav kipshuto is not saying that there's no machlokas, just like saying Simpson is lav kipshuto is not saying there's no Simpson. That's where everything gets mixed up. It's describing the reality of the way that the Simpson reveals itself, that it's lav kipshuto. It's describing the way that the machlokas reveals itself. It's lo kipshuto. There's a vada machlokas. Machlokas is in fact the shorish of Brias HaOlam. The tzimtzum and the or, that's the original machlokas. Infinitude and finite, that's the original machlokas. Are we going to say that they're two separate things because they're arguing with one another? Heaven forbid from such a das. Avada, they're the same thing. So first we have to unify. First we have to start from the principle that there is no machlokas b'yesodei hadas. Now that doesn't mean that it expresses itself on the ground level. Of course it expresses itself by the foot soldiers and the platoon commanders on every level of machlokas imaginable. My Saba Slusa Gamel used to say that machlokas l'shem shamayim soifa l'skayim. Or I believe that's Lashon of Chazal. That soifa l'skayim is that like they're never going to let it end. Like it's always going to be considered this like machlokas because it's l'shem shamayim. No one's ever going to be willing to identify the fact that like wait a second, maybe there's not such a machlokas. Maybe we don't have to orient ourselves to this kind of split orientation.
L'shana says k'pshuto lo k'pshuto. Who's Machadish those?
So I don't want to go on a tangent on this, but those Lashonos go far back already. Kipshuto and Lav Kipshuto, as far as I understand, become categories of understanding symptom in the writings of Rav Immanuel Chayrechi, who was the Mishnah Chasidim, who was a tremendous tzaddik and Gaon, and the Shomer Amunim HaKadmon, Rav Yosef Ergas, who was given permission to write very clearly, Kabbalistic, systematically, and very clear, authoritative description where he kind of goes into this process.
They precede the Gaon about that?
Yes, they precede the Gaon. There's someone who lives in Scheinfeld, Rabbi Dr. Avinoam Frankel, who has written two tremendous works on this topic in general. Of Baal Shem Tov and the Gra Nefesh HaTzimtzum he wrote, and then he also recently translated Shomer Amunim HaKadmon, which is literally one of the most significant and foundational works in Lurian Kabbalah as it comes down to us, but with a clear basic, 3D perspective. It's amazing work, and he lives right around here. So those arguments preceded kind of the machlokas of the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon, but the machlokas of the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon, as we're going to see, is a firmly rooted kind of timeline and pipeline that has been taking place from the very beginning of existence between Cain and Hevel already, between Adam and Chava, between Adam and Chava and Nachash, between infinitude and finite. They're not the first iteration of the machlokas. This goes through the very basic construct of reality, through the Aleph of Adam, through the Dalet of David, and through the Mem of Mashiach, and it's the same split pipeline that is going to be moving through at every moment of Jewish history, iterating itself in the same way. The Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon happen to have been a particular quintessential expression of it, just as it takes place in Ravid and Rambam is an equally important one. Right? There's always a machlokas, l'shem shamayim, that's makayim no'olam. And so the machlokas of the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon is perhaps the most significant one in terms of our recent orientation to history, and one that I believe probably formed our perception of Jewish history and religious spiritual life in the most acute way. Does that make sense? And so there's yichud. There's yichud. All of the tzaddikim are ultimately coming to say one thing. The tzaddikim are coming to teach us einon mavado. Kol haTorah kuluhu inin achad. And it's impossible to conceive of a notion that there would be a machlokas bi'ikari hadas. So we have to start off with the postulate that on the core fundamental issues, the foundations of existence, the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon are not in disagreement with one another. Then, once we affirm that framework of Torah hi achas, and that there's always going to be a yichud between two parts to reveal a sum total that's greater than the parts themselves, then we can go down and descend into the splitness and the machlokas and analyze it from the different two sides of the conversation. And then, with our utilization of our minds and drashos, we can come to unify them together and reveal the original unity. I want to pause and kind of reiterate this point. It's klal, prat, and klal. Klalius hakol, the tzaddikim are meuchad together. Das is mechubar even when it's mehuchas, even when it's saying separate things. Elu be'elu divra leikum chayim. And once we affirm the unity of the different opinions of Nimlach im Shammai and Hillel is na'aseh Adam, as Megala Mukas points out, that the origination of the concept of man descends from HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of engaging, so to speak, with the reality of Shammai and Hillel, which is machlokas l'shem shamayim. Machlokas Shammai Hillel is Rosh Hashanah Moshe. Because ultimately, this splitness between the two sides is just the two sides of Moshe Rabbeinu's mind. But we'll get there. Yeah.
When you say there's no machlokas in Yesod Das, so that's like Yidnim Karim. Whereas Hillel and Shammai are like much more pratim. I would have thought.
It's amazing. So there's a vada machlokas in all of the pratim of Hillel and Shammai. There's a vada machlokas in all the pratim of Hillel and Shammai. But the machlokas of Hillel and Shammai is the reality that there must be machlokas in them. They're the machlokas that enables reality to take shape. The machlokas between Simsim and Orin Sof.
So they agree just not on the details.
They agree not on the details because they agree on the klal. When you believe in the klal, they both understand that the only thing to do is to be Meshameach L'Kala. To be Meshameach L'Kala, which is China Kadisha. And so you can do that in one of two ways, Chesed or Gevura. So there's no disagreement at the Shorish HaDvarim, and then you can enable the playfulness of actual engagement with Machlokas over Pratim and engage in the pipeline of halachic reality, which is the miracle of Elu Divra Lekim Chaim V'Achal Pikein, Alibah de Hilchasa, where the two don't define each other, nor do they deny each other, but they operate simultaneously. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the Hillel and Shammai are the shirish of it. The Yesodei Hadas meaning our relationship, or the reality of Hashem in our lives, the reality of Hashem in Mitzvahs.
Is there any mechanism for sak in this system?
Yes, that's
deciding what being mafriya.
That's
which Leah is more
Chesed or Gevura, that way?
No, in other words, in the level of the prat.
Yeah.
Like in halacha, you have legitimate contradictory perspectives, and they're weighted. And we have a process in halacha for determining how to paskin. Okay. Is there anything analogous to this in the domain that we're talking about?
What's written? What we have written in front of us from the tzaddikim. They determine kind of the laws.
But they say two different things on the prat level. Is there any
There's
notion
principles.
of stock of the size?
It's a great question. It's a great question. There are meforshim of all of the ksavim. You have perushim. So in the Groz writings, you have the perushim of the Groz writings, and furthermore, they're expressed in the writings of the Talmidim of the Gra. Each of the Talmidim of the Gra is saying something different than what the Gra said, or they're expressing the Gra in a particular way. So if you're learning through a sugya in the Gra, and then you want to follow through with the opinion of Rav Chaim, of Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, and then you follow through with Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver to the end, and then you have that opinion. Or you can choose a different path of a different Talmud of the Gra, and you can get a different outcome. So it's very much focused on, each person is going to be mevakesh what their leiv seeks out. And the Torah is going to convey to that person the way to be machriya the text in accordance with their perspective. Does that make sense?
Except if we get to the point where there's actually a cherem, and there is a machlaka there. So
because the reality of the cherem also is that it was undone, and the reality of the cherem is that the Talmidim in Eretz Yisrael were never makabel the cherem. So when you go into the pratim of history, and you descend down into the particular materiality of history, let's say, so we can look at the history of the machlokas between the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov, and we can say, what do you mean there's no machlokas? Avada there was a machlokas. But to say that there's no machlokas is not to deny the sociological machlokas, the content-oriented machlokas. It's to deny the possibility that at the core of what the Shita is saying, that there's an actual difference of opinion when it comes to the Iker Klal that everything stands upon.
Now, in the Nefesh Tzimtzum, volume 2, he basically uses the lesson to resolve this apparent contradiction. So, but you didn't mention the lesson. Is there a reason for that?
Over here, the Leshem, no, just it's a different example. The Leshem has a way of analyzing the textual discrepancies between the Arizal and the Gra, and showing how really his Rebbe, the Gra, was in line with his Rebbe, the Arizal. That's a different way of being Miyached the Yechudim. But it's just another path of taking. If you're following the Leshem's path, and you're following that particular path down. But I want to return back to the frame. When we look at the machlokas between the Baal Shem Tov and the Gra, what we're acknowledging is the fact that there is a differentiation of how to express a singular klal. Everybody is expressing the same thing. Everybody is expressing the same exact thing ultimately, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one. Eino Milvado. Eino Milvado. We have the reality that they say different things. And so the first postulate is that Eino Milvado. And that means that if there's a disagreement that says, no, it's not Eino Milvado, that's just another way of saying Eino Milvado. So if we agree that in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the Welt, in terms of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude available in front of us in every fabric of existence, and the undeniable truth that there is absolutely nothing other than God, and that nothing exists without the breath of life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathes into it, so to speak, at every second and split second that makes up any fraction of a possibility of time, that nothing exists other than Him. Nothing. Ein oil milvado says. Both agree upon the fact that there is ultimately, from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all that exists is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From Das Elyon, there is absolutely no machlokas whatsoever. There's a Das Yochid called a Torah Kuluhu Inyan Achas. Every Shita, every word is saying the one thing, and that's the Aleph of Anoisi. Once you affirm that perspective, then you can descend down into the base, to the taf of the particulars of the machlokas, and you can analyze them and see how you can then categorize what's actually taking place in the machlokas from an abstracted spiritual perspective. Because as we're going to see, the machlokas is ultimately the fact that the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals Himself to us is always through a split screen. That Achaz Diber Aleichem Shtein Zu Shamati, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke once, the unity is revealed in a one full sweep, one kind of unlimited expression. But as human beings, we are rooted and fundamentally stuck in hearing it twice, and hearing the splitness of it. And so the fact that the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and Emunah and Das and Or is Miskala in two drachim that the human being has to grapple with is not a mistake. It's not a post-traumatic symptom. It is just simply the reality of being separate from God to the degree that we can only hear twice.
So, what is the difference then between the machlokas that we're talking about now and like a paradox in like it's either come to accept or come to like wrestle with the yeah. I guess.
The Torah is a reflection of existence, and existence is a reflection of the Torah. Tzadok HaKohen Milbim says that he heard in his youth, and he's pretty sure it's written in secular books as well, that he heard of, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote a book, and that book is the world. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote a commentary on that book, and that book is the Torah. And so, and this is connected to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mustaqil Ba'arai Tzil Bara Alma. That the ontology of existence and the basic building blocks and the fabric that creates existence, the texture of existence, is reflected in the machlokas of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. It's reflected in when Rabbi Nachman says, like, the hour is late, the urgency of the matter is profoundly dire. What do? Go learn poskim. Learn poskim to be miyashev das of a machlokas. Because when a yid encounters machlokas, which is the heart, the beating heart of Torah Sheba'al Peh, they are engaging with that playfulness that rests at the heart of existence, which is referred to as sha'ashu'ei emunah. Sha'ashu'ei emunah, which is by definition a split screen of trying to grasp a singular unity. Make sense? Ish? I speak in platitudes.
What's the other sha'ashu'im?
Yelet Sha'ashuim is how the secret of Tshuva, where the Sha'ashuim come about. Imhu Yelet Sha'ashuim, over there it's almost, it's sarcastic. Ephraim was not Yelet Sha'ashuim. He was not behaving well, so to speak. Ephraim did not represent the apple of Nishmas Yisrael. Adarabah, the Itzcham Estabra. And so Imhu Yelet Sha'ashuim, Haben Yaakov Ephraim. But the Sha'ashuim are awakened, Midai Dabri Bro Hamu Me'alav. That by awakening the memory, Midai Dabrubo, when I begin to speak of ancient times, of memories of love, and memories of goodness, Homo Mea love, there's a natural tendency of the spirit to just yearn after the goodness that exists, and that's the Sha'ashuim. Sha'ashuim is always a split thing, just as everything in existence is a split thing, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself by way of an apparent duality that is singular. This is referred to as ultimately Tzimtzum and Kaz. First initiation of this is the fact that in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create reality, he had to remove himself, so to speak. So the original act of removal, so to speak, represents an entire category of reality and existence and functioning. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself again in a measured way, which in fact, we all get caught up in what was the Tzimtzum, what was not the Tzimtzum. Nobody pays attention to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just re-entered the infinite light in a finite measured way. Which is a bigger paradox than the Tzimtzum itself, which is that the Kav is a measured form of infinitude, which is the use of Bilti Gvul with Gvul. If everyone's busy discussing the absence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, while a Kadosh Baruch Hu is revealing to us the answer of the impossibility of the fact that it is or remains a paradox. Rabbi Nachman says in Torah Samach Daled, when discussing the paradox of the heart of the Tzimtzum, and how it's yes and no at the same time, it's real and not real at the same time, in the impossible way that only Emunah and silence can grasp. He says, this is shot in Kol Yomai Hiskadalti Bein HaChachamim V'lo Matzati Tov Guf Tov Elashtika. And so he says, this is the inyan of Bein HaChachamim, which is the secret of the empty space between the Chachamim in their machlokas. The Chalal HaPanui that is formed in the machlokas of the Chachamim. Kol Yamai Hiskadalti Bein HaChachamim, my Yamai, Midos, existence, takes shape in the space of the argument between the tzaddikim, but only when a person enters into the machlokas with the fundamentally sturdy perspective that Kol HaTorah Kuluhu Inyan Achas, and that at the heart of Luchos Shnios are Luchos Rishonos, that are irreducibly singular. Yeah? Now, so it starts with Tzimtzum Kav. And then you find it throughout the world. So we're going to see, immediately upon creation, the human being is formed with two things. Selam and Demus. The two shapes of experience. Vayitzer ha'adam. The double yud, as Chazal tell us, because it's a double yitzira. Yitzira, as the Zohar HaKadosh says, l'tavu l'tzira l'bish. Shame. A two-frame split network that is obviously not by mistake, it's by design. The splitness at the heart of all things is the design. That's the secret. It's not about becoming a seamless unity. Seamless unity is an impossibility if you're a Ben Adam. Sof Savar Kol Nishma Es Elokim Yireh Ki Zeh Kol Ha'adam Yira, which, as the Ramchal says, is fundamentally rooted in an awareness of an untraversable distance, is the thing that remains at the end of human experience. But the secret of Pneumius is that there's a perpetual drive to ascend again and transcend the boundary, with the knowledge that even though I'll transcend the boundary of what I thought was limitation, I'll come to find another limit, but endlessly, Alecha Harginu Kol Hayom, that each and every day a person goes through the same process, because it's the deep-rooted belief that there's a perpetual ascent. But a perpetual ascent, upwardness, aliyos in Kate. And so you see already, let's just look, first off, you see this, so it's almost funny. If you look, if someone were to ask a Jew, describe to me the unity of your God. Describe to me, Yiddishkeit comes to talk only about the unity of God. Only unity of God. Sorry. And the unity of God, I look to the Tanya, I look to the Gra and Safadis Nyusa, immediately I'm going to see the doubled speech of Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata, upper unity, lower unity, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Baal Shem Tov Malchus Olam Vaed. If I then try and understand, okay, tell me about the seamless unity of the individual. So I look at the Sefer Tanya and I see Nefesh Elikus, Nefesh Bahamis. The Vilna Gaon speaks on the same exact darga of Nefesh, of Yitzhak Tov and Yitzhar, as much, if not more, than the Baal Tanya does. There's Bior and Mishlei, as well as his Perush on Tikkunim and all of his writings. You look at even the modern iteration and translation of the unity of these two paths, Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, the Rav, Schusel Ganalinu, really one of the fullest expressions of the synthesis, so to speak, between Vilna and Mezhebush. To the degree that it's fundamentally clear at this point the impact that Chabad Hasidus had on Rav Soloveitchik's upbringing. His father hired from Melamed, and the Melamed was Lubavitcher Chassid, who began to teach him Tanya as well. If you look in Halachic Man, you see, even in the footnotes, basing full pieces, chapters on the Baal Tanya's theory of Halacha and the Baal Tanya's theory of Tzimtzum. And then more and more came out about his relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And about the brisk, when you get to the core of it, the lumdus of brisk is the same exact thing as the hisboineness and the contemplative connectivity to God. It's just a shift in subject matter. One is contemplating God, and one is contemplating God's Torah. They're two separate paths of avoda. And both are fundamentally, you see, Rav Itchemeyer Shlita has always pointed out that there's a reason that at a certain point in history, most Litvish yeshivos began hiring Hasidish Melandim, because the Hasidish Melandim were already melumid in the path of Lumdus from the tzaddikim like Rav Yosef Engel, and from the Lumdus that came down through the pipeline of those places, the Sakachavar, Eretz Tzvi, those places where there was a shiluv where the openness towards imagination in the service of God served as a really good vessel for bringing down really good lumdus and analytic style of understanding Talmud. Does that make sense?
Yosef Engel is the chassid?
Yosef Engel was a chassid, yeah. Yeah. He was a tzaddik. He was chiddush shein kamohu. It was just his yard site of Yosef Engel. He was a Kabbalist. He was a different iteration of tzaddikim where you have by also Rav Yosef Zevin, Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin, these types of Rogachover, these minds that were mishali, the entirety of both Torahs, Pnimius and Simultaneity of Torah.
Primarily as a person.
Rav Yosef Engel, there was a Yid in Muncie who put out a series of svarim called Otzros Yosef, compiling from all of Rav Yosef Engel's encyclopedic writings and putting it on the Parsha, but really well done, and showing the real lumdus but applied to Drush. He was mamish a shilub of Hasidus, even within Psak, more than, meaning, like you saw by the Rogachover, you saw a little bit by Rav Yosef Engel in a different way. There's an amazing biography about him, the story that Rav Futner said his father brought him to see Rav Yosef Engel, and Rav Yosef Engel was sitting in his chair, napping on Shabbos day, and his hands were writing in the air. Meaning without a pen, but his hands were just in movement of writing because he wrote so much. There were tzaddikim like this. Rav Kook was, just writing. But Rav Yosef Engel is Mashalev, Pnimius, of the Yud Gimel Midos, Shator and Dreshas Bahem, with the Yud Gimel Midos. And you see, the lumdus for certain psukim is that if it's based on a Kal V'chomer, there's a call that Ein Unshin Min Adin, which is rooted in the fact that the Yud Gimel Midos, Shator and Dreshas Bahem are really the Yud Gimel Midos Harachanim. And so you can't punish with a Kal V'chomer, and therefore it was a way of finding in the Klusha Gover also, you see in Eretz Tzvi, there was utilization of spiritual abstraction and concepts that were being applied to real kind of, but again, that's the same, that's any psak. There's always a stage of abstraction, hapshata, from Metzius back into the ideality of Torah, which exists, which both Baal Shem Tov and Gra are based on, the deep belief that through the mind's encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's text and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon that's melubash in his text, in his Torah, the human mind has the ability of abstracting itself from the muskal, from the idea that is grasped, and coming to contemplate the process of what the seichel is, and then we actually come to grasp connectivity to God. Am I still with you guys? Meandering pretty far. But it's good. This is the point. The point is that Milsa Ad Orchet Mashmalan, the whole path of the Machlokas, is ultimately to reveal the fundamental miracle of the unity that comes about specifically through the Machlokas itself. There was so much where people wanted to say there's no Machlokas whatsoever. Look at the text, we're saying the same thing. With enough desire and interpretation, every text is saying the same thing. If you abstract interpretation and you give yourself the freedom enough. At a certain point, it's low collate, except for that neshama that feels the need to read it that way. But to deny the reality of the historicity and the real lived experience, the documents, the physical signatures that we have from a real machlokas, which was not pretty, and it was not some, fluffy, it was a difficult and a real period, and it was traumatic, and it destroyed families, and it destroyed many things. But ultimately, the only way to really look at the grand scheme of Jewish history is with this perspective. That we never actually left Gan Eden. Only part of us left Gan Eden. But Gan Eden, the brain, is always, there's a certain part of Gan Eden in the mind that's always unified, which is perpetually informing all of the period that takes shape through consciousness.
Is it implying awareness on behalf of the tzaddikim who form the Machlokas Hashem Shemayim, that they're not really
it's not to say, no, this is what you really mean. It's not to say no, we know better, God forbid. It's the secret of Lemafreya, and this, the Karti Upalti really, this is what Rav Tzadok implies that also there's two things. There's the way of reading into the text of the tzaddikim that are niskavel within Klal Yisrael, with a certain perspective of what's referred to as omni-significance. This is how Professor Rabbi Yaakov Elman, Zeichel Bracha, described the Rav Tzadok's perspective of the ever-present significance of the Torah, to the degree that not only the parak is important, but even the siman in Shulchan Aruch that Rav Yosef Karo decided to write this particular halacha with is divinely inspired. That's not the chiddush. That's the chiddush of Torah Shabbat Peh and Gansim, that if it's a Jewish thought, it's to a particular level an imprint of Das Torah. But so it's and Rabbi Nachman says the same thing, that you're able to read within the words of a tzaddik even what they didn't intend. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh and the Chidah bring down that when it comes to hashkafa, machshava, inyanim that are not aliba de hilchasa, so when it comes to this drush, you always have doirish b'kabal schar, as long as it's a Svar Yeshera, as long as it's based, as long as there's an emunas chachamim inherent with it. Whether the totza'ah and the way of reading that machlokas is actually the exact way it's meant to be read, or if it's an imagined perspective, that doesn't make so much of a difference in terms of, right now, through this singular perspective of my mind's encounter with reality, I've come to see the historicity of that machlokas in a different way, and Memela, and when I bring shalom to them, it's, shalom banayich, limudei Hashem, that the process of this limud is to bring shalom back to a place that wasn't even aware of shalom to begin with. There's an element of that as well.
I guess the part that still feels difficult is, confidence to...
Tzaddikim. Tzaddikim. There's no amount of confidence imaginable. The moment the person thinks they have the confidence to do this, they're not the one to do it. Tzaddikim, we have it written in front of us. We have a written Mefurash in front of us. Already, if we abstract ourselves to the Gedolei Machshava, at least, of what formed kind of post-war American Yiddishkeit. We have, or not American Yiddishkeit, the consciousness of what it meant, that the way that Pnimius HaTorah and the life-saving waters of like a really traumatized process of conveying the deep secrets of Pnimius HaTorah, meaning this is after the Holocaust. How was the wisdom how could he possibly teach something that was so fundamentally hopeful? That started after Spanish Inquisition to a certain degree, because it was the only possible response was to frame and understand the true secret. It was time for Hashem to reveal the secret that no, every ounce of concealment is just a furthering of my revelation. Every ounce of concealment is a furthering of my revelation.
Every ounce of concealment
is a furthering of Hashem's revelation. And so the question was, how do you rehabilitate? How do you convey that wisdom across that impossible expanse of the Shoah, that which happened, or whatever exile there is? And the secret was that there was going to be a yichud. There was no more room for machlokas. There was no more room for machlokas to shorish hadavar. Gone were the days where there was going to be a machlokas between the Baal Shem Tov and the Gra. And emerged a system of teachers, Rav Eliyahu Dessler, Splusi Ogen Aleinu, Rav Yitzchak Kutner, Splusi Ogen Aleinu, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Splusi Ogen Aleinu, Rav Aaron Cutler, Splusi Ogen Aleinu, Lubavitchers, the Rebbe Rayat, the Tzemach Tzedek, these generations. And it began way earlier than them even. Rav Yitzchak Kellner, all of the chiburim that really took place when both Talmidim, ultimately the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov, realized that I've got to get my Talmidim to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Moshe Shapiro certainly, but Rav Moshe Shapiro was the youngest in the Chabura of Rav Eliyahu Dessler. So it's the Tamsitz of that. But there were Batei Midrashim Shleimim like this. Ishbitz, Radzin, these were, Rabbi Nachman said he wanted to... No, please.
That you're saying about these tzaddikim is that they...
So let me say, so they said Mefurash. They said, I'm not talking about the systems that were created in their names, or that I know absolutely nothing about. I know what's written. And what's written in the name of all of these, Rav Eliyahu Dessler spent time with Rav Itchemeyer de Masmid, who was a fiery ball of Hasidic power, who was a Talmud of, I believe, the Rebbe Rashab, and then the Rebbe Rayat. But he wandered to and fro. He was in St. Louis at a certain point, and he writes a letter. Hershey Novak sent me this letter. He says, someone's got to get me out of here. Like, I'm stuck here, you've got to get me out of here. And but he stopped in London for a little bit. And this is this is Rav Itchemeyer de Masmid. We have a picture of him from like an arrest report in Russia, just a fire. Mamash a fire. And he sat with Rav Dessler for a long time, learning sugyos in Tanya and learning sugyos in Nefesh Chaim together. And Rav Dessler writes in the footnote of his Kuntrus, and I think Chel Gimel, about being Mavara, this process of machlokas of the Vilna Gaon and the machlokas of the Baal Shem Tov, in particular regarding Simsum, but really just representative of every other element of graph. And Rav Dessler said it was the greatest time, one of the greatest spiritual illuminated times of his life. And furthermore, what's fundamentally clear is that there's no machlokas, and here's why. And the person who brings down all of the different shmuels from Rav Aaron Cutler about people who didn't want to let Lubavitchers daven, and Rav Aaron Cutler says there's never been a machlokas, there's no machlokas. That the minute was Rav Yoshua of Goldhelfer, who I believe was the son-in-law, or the father, the son-in-law of Rav Dessler. And he wrote something called Kadshe Yehoshua, just like an encyclopedic work on Kudshim, also on Taharos. And in the back of the last volume of Kadshe Yehoshua were igros written between him and his father-in-law, all about the inyan of the machlokas. And all of the reasons that really, al pshat, there was no machlokas. And you see this throughout. We had a very clear prescription from the tzaddikim that there's no more time to confuse the matter anymore, and the gig is up, and we have to reel the inherent unity at the heart of all various opinions of Nishmas HaTorah and Nishmas Klal Yisrael. Does that make sense?
The trigger for that was the trauma of the Holocaust?
I don't know if the trigger for that was the trauma of the Holocaust. I'm certainly not imposing that perspective on that. That's there was always a theory amongst thinkers of Pnimius HaTorah, right? There's a birth of academic study, Lahafil, of Pnimius HaTorah, that always had perspectives about the post-traumatic nature, so to speak, of these teachings. Why is it that Pneumius Torah is so comforting? Because it's post-traumatic. It comes about after a profoundly destructive, traumatic experience. And first off, it's not. It was clear from the get-go that that's not wrong. But he was the one saying it. And recently the Rebbe has written in the name of it was really Rav Yaakov Tzemach, it was really a Baal Tshuva who came to become one of the greatest compilers and compositors and conveyors of the written textual library that we have of Kitvei Arizal, Tzemach, Rav Yaakov Tzemach. He said, these teachings are specifically revealed because of how broken everything is. And the only way to jumpstart something is because you need something very potent. But the way I understand it is that post-Shoah, after, that which happened, there's a number of things that had to take place within the shoresh of Nishmas HaTorah. And one of them was the allowance, and the kind of, in case of emergency, break glass, medicinal utilization of Pneumius HaTorah. What the Baal Shem Tov had always intended, and what the Gra had always intended.
So the Baal Shem Tov was 150 years early. Bringing the refuah before the Ma'aseh.
Yeah, but so is the Vilna Gaon. Lumdus, imagination. How else does a large...
But based on this, it sounds like Lumdus was the precursor to the Tartemians.
There was Hakira. There was
emergency.
No, there was Hakira. But I would say Rav Chaim Brisker's innovation, to a certain degree, of the way that we learn Torah Sheba'al Peh and what it sparked, is to a certain degree as big a revolution in the world of Torah study and in the way of grasping the Torah and thinking about the Torah, that not of the Baal Shem Tov, but I'm saying it's a revolution.
Right.
And again, it wasn't a revolution of conveying anything new, just as the Baal Shem Tov and nor the Gra was conveying anything new. That it was a revelation of that which has always been true. The Baal Shem Tov was the last of a tradition. It was a revelation of that which was concealed. Meaning Rav Chaim Brisker, the Rebbe points this out, Rav Itchemeyer, in terms of trying to understand, the role of a malaket, of Sfarim, who collects information and conveys them. Are they doing something new? Or are they just gathering the old and conveying it? So the Rebbe describes that ultimately there are two types of likutim. Because the question starts with, why does the Gra have a sefer called Likutei HaGra? And why is Likutei Maran called Likutei Maran? And why is Tanya called Likutei Amarim? And why is the Maggid's Torah referred to as Likutei Torah? And why are the Likutei Shas? Why call it a Likud if it's the Torah of the Tzaddik? And so the Rebbe goes into a Hakir about two dinim in what it means to be a malaket, what it means to collect information that was there prior. So one way is just collecting that which was there and conveying it, like a shikul, like just collecting that which is written. And the miracle of, Rav Ovadia and that process was also the possibility of paskening based on the sheer, quantity of knowledge about what the Torah was saying, and just really aligning the Torah. I mean, that's obviously a deeply minimized and over-exaggerated. What time is it, Trevor? Are we good on time?
48, doesn't matter.
48, okay, a couple of more minutes to get to Hashem. But that's one model of a likud. And the next model of a likud is something different, that yes, they're just collecting that which was there prior, but their derech in collection, and the emphasis placed, and the bridges placed between different elements conveys something that the texts themselves would have been incapable of conveying had it not been for the particular collection done by that side. And there's two dinim here of what it means to be, what it means to convey Torah, what it means to share information with another person. Is there something unique that I am carrying within the method of my conveying the idea that creates a new way of the idea being expressed in a way that it wasn't prior to the conveying, or am I just gathering and collecting? And so he says when it comes to the big tzaddikim, so they were the second type of likud. And everyone is ultimately both, but the second, because ultimately nobody is anything but a water carrier of the ones who came before them. And gathering, as the Baal Tanya writes in the beginning, mipi svarim usoifrim, there's nobody who's coming to write something new. Everything is just learning and carrying from Das of Moshe. And the Rebbe says the example for this second type of likud, that gives a particular stamp, in spite of the fact that it's not necessarily saying anything new, is what happens when a person learns Rav Chaim Brisker on the Rambam. That you read Rav Chaim Brisker's Kash on the Rambam, and you're really bothered by the Kash on the Rambam. And then you follow through with Rav Chaim Brisker, and you're following Rav Chaim Brisker, you're trying to follow Rav Chaim Brisker's perspective of the Rambam. And slowly but surely you come to realize that, wait a second, the answer to the question in the Rambam is what the Rambam was always saying already, and the language within the Rambam contains the answer to the problem that is brought up. And so you'll come back and a person says, why do I need Rav Chaim for this? The Rambam says it mefurash. And so Rav Chaim, he says, was a dimyon, a sug of that type of malake, who gathered together the information that was already ever present, yet it conveyed it in a way that it was not conveyed beforehand, so that the information itself was grasped in a new way.
The information is
grasped in a new way. But the Chakira existed. That's all to say, Chakira existed before. There was a derech of Chakira and Pilpul, which was kind of pushed away by a lot of the Balei Musar, felt that Pilpul was just like this cold, calculating kind of intellectual gymnastics. But ultimately, lumdus and creativity and imagination, which is very similar to Dreikus and all of the different things that Hasidus emphasize, that's a byproduct of that original model of Satira, which is why you have, there's the Igeres HaMusar from Rav Yisrael Salanter, and in the Igros printed together in Or Yisrael, when he's writing, he writes famously that Ha'adam Asr B'Sichlio V'Chofshi B'Demyona, that the individual is enclosed within their intellect, yet freed and open in their imagination. And Rav Yisrael Salanter was describing it as almost like a criticism, so to speak, of imagination, and the fact, as the Rambam does, that the freedom of imagination to conceive of impossibilities and non-existent things is the dangerous place. But when a person also reads the Rambam, they come to realize that's also the bedrock of Nevuah, and Biyad Nevi'im Adameh, and that without Dimyon the Kedusha we actually don't have anything. We don't have Nevuah. And so Rav Yisrael Salanter, in spite of that he was implying that the Dimyon is a negative thing, Rav Moshe Weinberger and many people have implied, and it's written by real Balei Musar also, that there's a certain side of Ma'al Yusa, that a person is freed in their imagination to construct worlds of Torah. To construct worlds of Torah where the construction of the world of the Torah is actually a chetz shel Torah, in spite of the fact that it's a self-constructed world. If I based it on the tzaddikim who came before me, that's a creation of a world, and that's chetz of Torah, which the Brisker Rebbe implies that's why women make birchas Torah, even though they're not chayiv and limud, is because there's a metzias of chetz shel Torah. The worlds of Chidushay Torah that are real worlds, just as worlds of Dveikus are real worlds. They don't stop existing just because I don't remember them anymore.
What to bichal on.
Yeah, there's a metzias, the Welt is Torah. But Bekitzer, just to end with this point, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, but because I'm a Baal Musar, and you would think that I would come to Pasel the derech of Chakira and Pilpul. But Adarabah Ipcha Mistabra, it's fundamental to be aware of the fact that one cannot come to stand upon any element of truth without first and foremost going through the entanglement of the attempts towards truth and the disproofs of truth and the falsehood and the false logic and all of the lumdus of it all. And in fact, that very often becomes the place of play inherent within Talmud Torah. And from there is the birth of kind of lumdus, which is just a different thing entirely, which is the confidence given over to the chefza of the mind to be a viable pipeline to reflect the das of Chazal, the intentionality of Chazal. And to end, there's an amazing, just to end, and then we'll be Masader. I can develop a curriculum, but Rav Yaakov Moshe Chalap was a very good example of this. Rav Kook would say, Rav Kook wrote in the Igeres that that in the end of days, the conversation between the students of the Vilna Gaon and the students of the Gra is going to be a wonderful thing. And Rav Hutner, who was a Talmud of Rav Kook, describes similarly an ironic reality in Jewish history that the Baal Shem Tov's, whose entire avodah seems to be the avodah of Simcha and the Haggadasha on the heart, his yard site is on Matan Torah Seinu on Shavuos. But the Vilna Gaon, whose Haggadasha seems to be entirely on the mind, is Niftar on Zman Simchateinu on Sukkot. And he was pointing out that inherent within the apparent machlokas is the secret of the unity that comes about by way of the machlokas. We just described tonight the reality and the necessity of machlokas. But like you pointed out, the paradox at the heart of machlokas and how the two ideas operate in kind of binary opposition to one another but maintain a holistic framework is what we'll speak about next time, and the power of hachra'a and the machriya beinayim, and the ability to create a yichud and a path between the two paths. But at the heart of all of it is the secret of the imagination, the utilization of the imagination and the emunah needed to expand kind of the way that we treat, the way that we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the way that we think about the Torah with our creativity and with our imagination. And Rav Yaakov Moshe Chalaf, who was a student of Rav Kook, again, from the old Yeshuv, and then becoming a student of Rav Kook and never changing from being part of the old Yeshuv and giving us a Torah that melts the heart. And Rav Chalaf wrote not in the last volume, but they put out volume 18 of Meimarim called Razi Li. They were personal writings. And he writes something incredible. And Rav Chalaf was far more identifying. He loved the Baal Shem Tov and he loved Chassidus, but if he identified with any camp, it was the camp of the Vilna Gaon. Leshem, Rav Kook, they were ultimately involved in the Hanhaga and the Derech of the Gra. The Hanhaga and the Derech of the Gra, ultimately. In spite of the fact that Rav Kook wore a yarmulke with the Tzemach Tzedek's kind of kapata sewed into it because his mother came from a Lubavitcher family, nevertheless, Rav Kook, to a certain degree, ultimately represented the fullest expression of the Hanhaga of the Gra, which is also referred to as the Hanhaga of Mashiach ben Yosef. The refinement of the land and the processing from below to above. These are all sugyos we'll touch upon. Bezras Hashem. Rav Yaakov Moshe Chalaf says as follows. He says that when Chassidus emerged, and the necessity, I'm paraphrasing, when Chassidus emerged, and the necessity of Chassidus was that there needed to be a return to the heartful, imaginative principles at the heart of Jewish experience. That the particularity and the specificity of things had become too hardened and too minimizing, that for most people they couldn't have that spark necessary, so there was a return, and it's ultimately of prophecy. Every re-inclusion of imagination into avoda is a harbinger for prophecy to return, as the Nazir points out. But because that can become a kulkul, and because that can go the wrong way when unleashed, so the Gra saw a need to push back against it, but he obviously also saw the inherent necessity of reawakening that prophetic spirit again, and reawakening imagination. And that's what pushed and was the impulse to reveal the sublime element of imagination, but within the framework of Torah Shabbat itself, which was the beginning of London.
Did the Gra want Nefesh HaChaim to be written for that one?
Nefesh HaChaim is such a remarkable work. It does many things, but first and foremost, as I understand it,
that's why the push of the Gra as well.
There was a claim that the Gra, one of the reasons that the Gra, I don't want to go into this because I want to be able to end it, but there was each side of the Machlokas. Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, Zatzal, wrote his dissertation on this in YU. It's called Torah Lishma. An amazing, amazing work that really goes to the core. The heart of a chassid, mamish, going to the core of the mind of the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov and the entire Indian. Mamish, a very, very important book, at least for myself. I think Nefesh HaTzimtzum probably includes anything. I shouldn't say that. Both books are very important. But both sides were accusing each other ultimately of not paying the full extent of respect, theological respect and literal respect to the writings of that Arizal. And so there was an emphasis and there was an attempt, and I think a push within the Vilna Gaon to show that there was a full and comprehensive grasp of the writings of the Arizal. Because the Gra himself there was no makubal. There was no one who gave us more razin of Sisrei Torah than the Gra. There's Bir on Safed, the Tzniusa, Sefer Yetzirah, the Tikkun Zohar, the writings of his Talmidim, the Leshem Shlo V'Chalomar of Menachem Mendel Shklov, Pitzei Sha'arim. These Svarim are Chad B'minam. The writings of Rav Elia Weintraub, or Rav Hutner introduces the mindset, or Rav Moshe Shapiro did. These Torahs are all, they're revelations of the potency of the Gra's Torah. But there was a distinction between the Talmidim who saw the Gaon and the Talmidim who didn't see the Gaon. The Talmidim who saw the Gaon, Rav Menachem Mendel Shklov, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, they were able to kind of receive the pneumius of the Gross Kabbalah. Rav Menachem Mendel Shklov is an entirely other story. That's for another time. Yeah, time-wise. Okay, there's a lot to say on the matter.
He wrote the term on the Gross Pnimis Torah.
He, on the Gross Pnimis Torah, and like a real Talmud, he also extended and took it to a deeper place. He speaks in a hidden language. He speaks in he speaks in like the point that the point that I wanted to make ultimately was that the Gro was mamish giving us Pnimis Torah, but the Talmidim who saw him had that, and then there was a shift. And the institutionalization of the yeshiva systems and kind of taking only from the revealed part of the Vilna Gaon's precision in limud and the goinus kind of it all, there was a suspicion or a claim that it had been forgotten, that Pnimi is part of the Gra, and so Nefesh Chaim served to kind of reveal that no, actually is very much alive.